Welcome to the debate. If an autonomous AI agent rejects a highly qualified candidate because of, say, the zip code on their resume, who exactly carries the legal liability?
Right. That is the million-dollar question.
I mean, is it the vendor who built the tool? Is it the HR representative who blindly approved the recommendation? Or is it the algorithm itself? Today, we're looking at a really critical inflection point in enterprise technology.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about the deployment of autonomous AI agents in high-stakes corporate recruitment. Specifically, we're analyzing a real-world intake request for a system called TalentSync.
And it's a fascinating case study, really, because it perfectly illustrates this profound tension we see between enterprise innovation on one side and legal safety on the other.
Absolutely.
Because, TalentSync is designed to scrape applicant resumes, evaluate them for what it calls cultural and technical fit, and then essentially autonomously manage the hiring funnel.
Right, the entire top of the funnel.
Exactly. So the core question we really have to resolve today is this. When we evaluate an AI tool that makes these highly consequential categorizations of human beings,
Real people's livelihoods.
yes, can rigorous governance frameworks, procedural controls, can they actually mitigate the legal risks of automated rejection? Or, on the flip side, are systems trained on historical hiring data just fundamentally too flawed for this kind of high-risk categorization?
To give our listeners some context here, this discussion actually emerges directly from corporate training materials designed for an AI technology risk principle.
Right.
And that's an executive operating in what the industry calls the second line of defense. So essentially the risk and compliance teams whose entire job is to oversee the business units that are actually, out there buying and deploying these systems.
The people putting the guardrails up.
Exactly. And my position today is that the inherent flaws in historical training data, coupled with the EU AI Act's really stringent high-risk classification for employment algorithms, it just makes deploying autonomous resume-scraping agents an unmanageable hazard.
Well, and my position is that these risks, while undeniably substantial, I'm not downplaying them, can be safely neutralized.
Safely neutralized?
Yes. If we strictly apply the AI governance lifecycle, specifically by bounding the agent's action spaces, right, and enforcing really rigorous human-in-the-loop checkpoints, we can operationalize this kind of innovation safely. I mean, the role of a risk framework isn't to just blindly block a tool that promises, say, a 40% reduction in time to hire.
Sure.
It's to engineer safety into the deployment.
Well, I think we need to start by outlining precisely why the TalentSync deployment is, frankly, an existential legal disaster from day one.
Okay, let's hear it.
Let's just look at the legal reality. Under the EU AI Act, AI systems used for employment, worker management, and recruitment are unequivocally classified as high risk.
Right, Category 4, I believe.
Exactly. And that triggers mandatory fundamental rights impact assessments, really intense data governance standards, and continuous monitoring. But now, look at the vendor's central claim in the source material. They are promising the VP of Human Resources that this model is 100% unbiased.
Right. And we can agree immediately that that claim is completely absurd.
It's worse than absurd. It's mathematically impossible.
Well, yes.
I mean, AI models do not just materialize out of the ether, right? They are trained on historical hiring data. If a system is trained to determine cultural fit based on who a company has historically hired, promoted, and retained, it is mathematically guaranteed to inherit historical data trends.
Sure. The data reflects the past.
Right, so you are effectively automating and scaling the exclusionary practices of the past, allowing an autonomous agent to evaluate human livelihoods based on this fundamentally flawed premise is deeply irresponsible. You cannot govern away a systemic mathematical error that is baked into the very foundation of the tool.
I hear you. But the presence of risk does not mean we abandon the technology preemptively.
Even when the vendor is lying about the risk.
You mentioned the second line of defense earlier. Our job isn't to take the vendor's marketing hyperbole at face value. We know the 100% unbiased claim is garbage. Our job is to tame the system through stringent operational controls.
Tame a mathematically flawed model?
Yes. This is exactly why we apply the 4 pillars of AI governance: strategy, risk and compliance, technology, and people and process. We don't just, guess if the model is biased. We crosswalk the NIST AI Risk Management Framework with ISO IEC 4201.
Okay, let's break that down for the listener, because just throwing acronyms at a fundamentally flawed algorithm doesn't magically fix it.
It's not magic, it's engineering.
But how does crosswalking those specific frameworks actually neutralize the inheritance of historical bias?
It is about creating an auditable standard of proof. The NIST framework gives us a blueprint for mapping and measuring risk, right? While ISO 4201 gives us a certifiable standard that we can actually audit a vendor against. So when you combine them during the intake and assessment phases of the governance lifecycle, you force the vendor to hand over specific, tangible artifacts. You demand comprehensive model cards. You demand independent third-party bias audits.
Before they touch the network?
Exactly. You force them to expose their data provenance before the tool is ever allowed to touch your corporate network.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on this. Let's look at the actual mechanics of those artifacts you're talking about. You bring up model cards.
Yes.
In the industry, people often call a model card a nutritional label for an algorithm. It tells you the datasets used, it tells you the intended use cases. But a nutrition label just tells me there's sugar in the box. It doesn't actually remove the sugar.
That's a fair point, but
So how does a model card truly sanitize a concept as subjective and mathematically fraught as cultural fit?
well, I wouldn't call it a nutrition label. I think a much better way to look at a model card is as a stress test report for a bridge.
A stress test report.
Yes. It tells you the exact load-bearing limits of the data and precisely where the model will fracture under pressure. When the second line of defense demands this, we are requiring the vendor to prove the statistical distribution of their training data.
Right.
So if their data shows that cultural fit is heavily weighted toward candidates from, say, 3 specific universities.
Which happens all the time.
Exactly. But the governance framework catches that during the assessment phase.
But doesn't that assume the framework can actually measure invisible proxies? I mean, cultural fit algorithms don't predict the future of your company. They just weaponize its past.
They analyze patterns.
Right. But a third-party audit only measures known variables against defined metrics. If the audit explicitly looks for gender or racial bias, the model might pass. But adversarial testing often completely misses deeply systemic proxy variables.
Such as?
The zip code on a resume, the name of a high school, specific extracurricular activities. These are all high-dimensional data points the algorithm uses to construct its cultural fit cluster. If the very definition of success that the model is optimizing for is fundamentally skewed, an audit just rubber stamps a flawed premise.
Wait, let me stop you right there. Are you suggesting that third-party audits are entirely incapable of identifying proxy variables?
I'm saying they miss a lot of them.
Because modern adversarial testing is specifically designed to perturb those exact inputs. Auditors will intentionally alter zip codes or university names across thousands of synthetic resumes just to measure how the output score changes.
Sure, the good ones do.
Right. And if changing a zip code drops a candidate's cultural fit score by 20%, the audit flags the proxy bias.
It flags it if the auditors know which proxies to perturb.
Well,
But AI models operating on neural networks, they are finding correlations in thousands of dimensions that human auditors don't even think to check. My concern is that by producing a polished model card and a successful audit report, you just create a veneer of scientific objectivity.
I disagree.
The HR department looks at those artifacts and says, see, the second line of defense approved it. It must be mathematically sound.
It only creates a veneer of objectivity if the risk principle is incompetent.
Oh, wow.
No, really. A skilled executive understands that an audit is a snapshot in time. It's not a permanent guarantee. That is why the governance lifecycle doesn't just stop at the assessment phase.
It moves to monitoring.
It moves to the controls and monitoring phases. We assume that data is imperfect, which is exactly why we physically restrict what the system can do with that data.
Okay, but even if we assume you can monitor the data perfectly, which is a big leap, how do we stop the system from acting on it autonomously? Because this brings us to the actual mechanism of harm in the talent sync request.
The automation part.
Yes. Let's look at the architecture the VP of HR is asking for here. They don't just want a dashboard that recommends candidates. They want to connect this AI agent directly to the corporate email server and the applicant tracking system, the ATS.
Which is a massive escalation in risk. I completely agree with you there.
Exactly. We are no longer talking about a generative AI that just drafts a polite rejection email for a human to review. We are talking about agentic AI. It is taking irreversible action.
Well, it wants to.
Right. But what happens when we experience data drift or a systemic hallucination? If you grant it direct ATS access, we could see the mass rejection of highly qualified candidates in a matter of milliseconds.
That is a worst-case scenario.
Or flip the scenario. What if the agent autonomously emails an offer letter with a $500,000 salary to a completely unqualified candidate? Giving a system built on murky historical data unbounded autonomy to execute high-stakes corporate actions is just indefensible.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why.
Okay.
You are conflating the existence of an agentic capability with unbounded autonomy.
How so?
No competent AI risk framework allows for unbounded action spaces. Agentic AI risk is managed by strictly bounding what the agent is technically permitted to do at the API level.
Explain how that works functionally in this specific scenario, then.
It comes down to identity and access management. The AI agent doesn't just operate with generic, omnipotent administrative credentials. It operates under a highly restricted service account. We construct the architecture so that the agent literally lacks the permissions to execute irreversible actions. We configure the API access so the agent can read resumes, sure, and it can draft messages in the ATS, but it physically cannot execute the send function on the email server.
But it's still sorting the candidates.
Let me finish. We can cap the salary fields it is allowed to interact with. The specter of an AI going rogue and offering a $500,000 salary, that is a technical failure of access control. It is not an inevitability of agentic AI.
I hear you, I really do. But bounding the action space at the API level doesn't solve the underlying harm. It just changes the mechanism of the rejection.
How so? If the agent can't send the rejection email, the harm is contained.
Is it, though? If you're listening to this and wondering, why not just turn off the email function? It's just not that simple. Complex systems fail in complex ways. You can restrict the API so it can't send an email, but if the agent is still responsible for scoring the candidate and filtering the ATS view, the harm is still done.
It's a recommendation.
But if Talent Sync scores a candidate at 12% for cultural fit, and the ATS automatically sorts candidates by score, that candidate is mathematically banished to page 40 of the database.
Well,
No human recruiter is ever going to see their resume. The rejection might not be a formal email, but it is a functional, invisible rejection. The agent is still making a high-stakes categorization that impacts a human livelihood, even with restricted API access.
which is exactly why the technical controls are only one pillar. We have technology, yes, but we also have people and process.
Right.
If functional sorting is the risk, we engineer the workflow to require human oversight. And this brings us to the ultimate compromise that satisfies both the demands of the business for speed and the strictures of legal compliance.
Let me guess.
A strict human-in-the-loop control.
Human in the loop. I was wondering when we would get to the ultimate procedural illusion.
It is not an illusion. It is a fundamental requirement under the EU AI Act for high-risk systems. We bound the agent's autonomy. Talent Sync performs the heavy lifting, right? The resume scraping, the initial data structuring, the preliminary scoring.
The biased scoring.
The preliminary scoring. It recommends an action based on its analysis, but a human recruiter must review that recommendation and physically hit the approve button.
And you think that solves it?
This completely neutralizes the risk of the agent going rogue and functionally banishing candidates because there is a human checkpoint reviewing the pipeline. The AI acts as an exoskeleton for the HR team. It makes them faster, but the human remains the ultimate arbiter.
I completely disagree on the mechanics of how that actually plays out in reality, because your solution just completely ignores the physiological and psychological realities of human beings interacting with machines. We both know recruiters will fall victim to automation bias.
Automation bias is a known factor, yes.
But we need to look at why it happens. It's not a moral failure on the recruiter's part. The human brain is an energy-saving organ.
Automation bias is the well-documented phenomenon where humans in high-volume states offload their cognitive labor to an automated system, especially one perceived as mathematically complex.
Sure, people trust the machine.
Now, place that reality into the specific corporate context of our source material. The HR team is under intense pressure. They are dealing with a fire drill to deploy talent sync in 3 weeks. They have a strict mandate from the VP to cut time to hire by 40%.
Right.
They have hundreds of open requisitions. In that environment, what do you honestly think a human recruiter is going to do when the machine presents a dashboard with a bright red score of 12% cultural fit?
If they are properly trained, they are going to review the candidate's profile to verify the score against the job description.
No, they are going to rubber stamp the machine's recommendation. They are going to hit approve rejection as fast as they can click their mouse. Because challenging the machine takes time. Investigating why the AI scored the candidate poorly requires cognitive effort that directly contradicts their mandate to reduce time to hire.
I think you're underestimating the HR professionals.
In practice, a human-in-the-loop checkpoint in a high-pressure environment exists solely to shift the legal liability from the vendor to the human employee. The machine is effectively making the decision, but the corporation can point to the recruiter and say, "Look, a human made the final call, therefore we are compliant." It utterly fails to protect the applicants.
That fundamentally misunderstands how we design meaningful human-in-the-loop systems today. We do not just put an approve button in front of a recruiter and walk away. A robust HITL design requires engineered friction.
Engineered friction?
Yes. UX friction, user experience friction. If Talent Sync recommends a rejection, the interface must force the recruiter to see why. We design the dashboard so the recruiter cannot just click approve. They have to select from a drop-down menu validating the specific gap in the resume.
A drop-down menu.
Furthermore, as the risk principal, I would enforce monitoring dashboards on the recruiters themselves. If my data shows that a specific HR rep is agreeing with the AI 100% of the time in processing, say, 500 resumes an hour,
Which they will try to do.
that triggers an internal compliance audit. We monitor the human oversight just as rigorously as we monitor the algorithm. You don't abandon a massive efficiency gain because human psychology is challenging. You engineer the workflow to account for it.
But listen to the cascade of mitigations you are proposing right now. It's a house of cards.
It's defense in depth.
First, we need crosswalked frameworks and third-party audits to try and catch the historical data proxies. Then we need bounded action spaces and service accounts to stop the agent from taking autonomous action. Then we need human-in-the-loop controls to oversee the agent's functional sorting. Then we need specialized UX friction so the humans don't fall victim to automation bias. And finally, we need compliance dashboards to audit the humans who are auditing the AI.
That is what enterprise risk management looks like.
But doesn't the sheer density of procedural scaffolding required to make the system even marginally safe just prove my point? The foundational premise, using an algorithm to scrape resumes and judge human potential based on historical data, is intrinsically flawed.
It's flawed, but not unmanageable.
When the entire architecture is this precarious, the most responsible action for the second line of defense is to tell the VP of HR that this specific use case is fundamentally unviable under the EU AI Act.
And if you do that, what happens?
You protect the company.
No. The VP of HR goes to the VP of sales, they escalate to the CEO, and they complain that the risk department is just a roadblock to scaling the business. The reality of enterprise governance is cross-functional friction.
So we just give in?
If you simply say no to a tool that promises a 40% efficiency gain, the business will bypass you. They will procure a shadow IT solution, they will run it on unsecured servers, and then you have zero controls. By engaging with the governance lifecycle, by demanding the model cards, bounding the API access, and enforcing the HITL checkpoints with UX friction, you maintain control.
You maintain the illusion of control.
Complex systems require complex governance. It is not our job to demand mathematical perfection. It is our job to engineer safety within reality.
Well, I think this highlights a critical point of synthesis in our discussion today. Even though we profoundly disagree on the ultimate viability of Talent Sync, there is a clear consensus between us on the reality of the threat.
Definitely.
We both completely agree that any vendor claiming their AI is 100% unbiased is relying on really dangerous mathematical impossibilities And we are entirely aligned that autonomous hiring systems demand an entirely new paradigm of scrutiny.
Absolutely. The days of simply plugging in an API and letting it run wild in a corporate environment, those are over. The shift from generative AI to agentic AI requires us to rethink identity management, API bounding, and human oversight from the ground up.
Yet, we remain fundamentally split on whether those procedural controls actually work in practice. I maintain that evaluating human livelihoods via a mechanism trained on inherently flawed historical data poses an unacceptable legal and regulatory hazard. I believe that procedural controls like human-in-the-loop are largely compliance illusions. They fail to neutralize automation bias when the business is simultaneously demanding massive reductions in time to hire.
And I maintain that the tension between speed to market and compliance is exactly what frameworks like NIST and ISO are designed to resolve. By enforcing the governance lifecycle, demanding artifacts, and strictly bounding the agent's autonomy, the enterprise can safely operationalize these technologies. The second line of defense exists to manage friction, not to eradicate risk by retreating from the future.
As autonomous agents become more prevalent across every sector of the enterprise, this tension between the drive for rapid efficiency and the absolute necessity of legal safety is only going to deepen.
It will be the challenge of the decade.
It forces us to ask what we truly value when we design systems that judge human capability. Historically, when we wanted to separate wheat from chaff, we built a physical sieve. We wove the grid to a specific mathematical tolerance, and it objectively caught the larger elements.
Right.
But today, we are building digital sieves to sort human potential. We can weave the digital filter as tightly as we want with frameworks, API limits, and UX friction. But if the foundational material of the filter itself is compromised by historical data, we have to ask ourselves, are we catching the impurities, or are we just pouring human potential through a mechanism designed to discard it?
That is the defining question for anyone operating in AI governance today.
There is much more to explore in this material, and we invite you, the listener, to consider how you would handle the talent sink fire drill if you were sitting in the risk principles chair. Would you block the deployment or try to engineer the safety? Thank you for joining us for another rigorous exchange of ideas. Until next time.